So I spent a lot of time doing this type. We will go, and I still do, I like to do prints. And these prints of mine, I did in, one of them I did here in Santa Ana. And this one I did in New Mexico. So we'll go out, like Carlos and his wife and myself, go out to New Mexico, to Santa Fe, and check into this a press called hand press, and spend a few days just printing, doing monotypes. So this is a monotype, and the other one here is an etching. And my teaching at UCLA was printing, etching. That's what I taught there. And but I had to say that it's difficult looking at them and not having a painting to show you. But let's see, what else did I miss? I miss Laura Aguilar. They're all friends here. They're all friends that we all know each other. Salomon Huerta, Miguel Angel Reyes, and Dan McCleary. People who all know each other as friends, and who knew Gene at one time or another. We all had a relationship with him. So I think that's all I'm going to say, and I'm going to open it to, this is very informal for you to ask questions. No questions? Yes? No?
What's the difference between the monotype and the etching?
A monotype is you do just one. You have, let's say you get a piece of plexiglass and you paint on it. You do it like you do a painting. And then you put a piece of paper on it and put it through the press. So when you get the result, it's just one print. And an etching is you do a series of them, and they're all exactly the same. So it's a series of prints, all exactly the same. It could be an etching, a lithograph, and a monotype is only one. And you could try putting it a second time and get a ghost print, and then you can later on go back and add to it. Mm-hmm. So, but it's only a monotype.
Can I ask you to elaborate a little more on your friendships, how they developed, and how you guys all met each other?
Oh, but that would be interesting. Carlos Almaraz and his wife, Elsa. Carlos and I went to school. I met them separately, and then one day I saw them together, and Elsa said, "Oh, we're seeing each other." I said, "What?" So, and they dated each other for a couple of years, and then they got married, and we were always close for many years. And so this is Elsa. Ruben Ortiz, who teaches at San Diego University, he lives in Echo Park, and I met him through, he came through LA, and he was with a friend that knew me from my years at the museum. And they went to my studio and dropped a note saying that they were there and they wanted to see me, and that's how I met him. And years later, he actually bought my house in Echo Park, the one where he left the note, and that's where he lives. And he does photographs and conceptual art. And then Frank Romero and Carlos were very good friends from college years. They went to school together, and they were very, very close. Carlos lived with him when we were at Otis. And over here, Laura Aguilar is a photographer, and I met her when I participated in a group of artists, photographers. Very different, not very different from the painters, but there were also a group of photographers, and we all had a group called, do you remember the group? Sorry.
Something Consejo de...
Oh, yeah. Well, it was the Council of Latin American Photographers, and there was around 10 of us here. And so that's how I met Laura Aguilar, Ricardo Valverde, Arama Vilar, who I don't know if they're part of the collection. Is he, Ricardo, part of the collection? Probably.
There's 700 pieces.
There's 700 pieces, so there's got to be one in there.
I was going to ask you, do you have an idea of the percentage of photography in his collection versus his paintings? It
No.
seems like he collected quite a bit of photography.
Yes, I was very surprised. And so Laura Aguilar, a part of the photographers, and there's many photographers in our community. She's just one of them. Salomon Huerta is one of the youngest artists in our group, and how I met him was through a collector, a friend of ours, Miguel Angel Reyes Sanchez, and I met him through a group of gay artists that I belong to called Viva. Dan McCleary, he went to one of my exhibits and left me a note that he wanted to meet, and that's how I got to know everybody. But separately,
They all know each other.
we all know each other.
Yeah.
And then through Gene, also, we all knew Gene.
Yeah.
And Gene was very interested in art and in artists. He was interested in talking to artists. And that's what really made that relationship with him. He wasn't just a collector, because you have collectors that come and they're looking for the right piece for the collections. And Gene was more personable.
Yeah.
He, after talking to you and visiting you, and at some point he will acquire some of your work. Very different. Eddie, did I miss something you said Eddie Dominguez, my partner?
And as you traveled the last 10 years, and the fact that these artist communities are so influential in kind of the direction that your art takes, how do you find these communities, like when you travel abroad in India and other places? Like, how does one navigate that?
When we just got back from Europe, and I've gone many times to the Louvre Museum, and I was with Eddie and a couple of my godkids, and they said, like, you get lost, and I tell them that's because I'm here and I have to go look at something that I'm interested in looking at. But outside of that, I don't go to galleries and look at the art scene anymore. I used to, from the time I was a student, because I spent a lot of time in research. When I was a student, I worked in the library documenting art for art history. So all the teachers that taught art history would ask me to make slides for their classes. So I got to know a lot of art. In fact, I was very surprised when I went to Europe and I would look at paintings and I said, oh my God, I only see them this small or like in print, and then here's a huge painting, So that was interesting. So, and I was very interested in all the art magazines and all of that stuff, and I find out that I'm no longer drawn to that, But I do know some of the artists. Yesterday I was listening on NPR. I was listening to an exhibit that is being done at a jail in London, where there's in the jail they have this exhibit, and they invited many artists to do installation pieces throughout the jail. What's the name of the writer? Osterweiler.
And it's in the cell at the jail. So it's at the jail.
Well, they did this installation in the entire, Oscar Wilde, I don't know if you know who he was, but his jail cell, it's empty, but everywhere else there's exhibits by major artists, and also there's readings from some of his writings. He wrote a book after getting out of jail called The Profundis, and Patti Smith was going to read, and it takes 6 hours to read it. So they were going to be doing it continuously throughout the exhibit, and there's some great artists, contemporary artists doing it. So I do hear, but I don't, and I read on art, but I don't pursue it as much anymore. And the same community of artists that are here is still my community of artists now. Dan McCleary invited me to speak at his school, and Salomon Huerta we see. Laura Aguilar I don't see as much. Frank Romero spends a lot of time in Europe, and Elsa Flores lives in Hawaii and goes back and forth. Graciela Iturbide is such a big, phenomenal photographer, very famous. Antonio Turok, I do see him and his wife. They live in Oaxaca, Mexico. Armando Cristeto is incredible, resourceful person in Mexico City on photography and the arts in general and people. And I don't know the other two artists here, but we're all still very much together. Armando Cristeto was in Mexico City on my way to Europe, and there was a huge photograph outside a museum of his, and we're happy to see him being successful after all these years.
Can you talk a little bit about those four? Were you ever involved in it?
Yeah, a little bit. Carlos, Roberto de la Rocha, Beto de la Rocha, Magoo, who just passed away, and Frank Romero did this show at the LA County Museum, curated by Hal Glicksman, who used to be the director of the Otis Gallery. And they got together, these artists, but they were, I think, if I want to say this, they're like the front runners and the elders of the Chicano movement in LA, because we could go all the way to San Diego, to San Francisco, and there's many personalities, many artists, but they were the artists that broke through and showed at the museum. I don't know, 1972, I think, around there. Yeah, and they worked together. The two of them lived together, and there was a lot of back and forth feeding of ideas. And if you look at the work at that time, there's a lot of similarities, and not just stylistically, but in concept. You know, it's community, it's political. Yeah. So that was interesting. I was an undergraduate when when that was happening. So I knew the curator, and I knew all of them. Yeah, it's a small community, really, when you come to think of it. And so I don't think I have made other artist friends, but pretty much we all stay in touch.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
I have one other question for you.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to talk a little bit about your creative process, and as we talked about it in our introductions, Roberto travels a lot, and I want to ask you if you have a certain method that you go through when you decide to travel abroad for inspiration. Does it just come to you, or do you have a schedule that you follow when you go places to get your?
To India, I went 3 times, and a lot of work came out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the work in the past came from my talks with, during the AIDS epidemic, my talks with Gene and my concerns for what was happening. I spent 25 years working with Jan Baum, so there I would have a show every year. And I was teaching at UCLA or at Cal State, and there was enough in the teaching atmosphere, and I was also, interested in reading about art and looking at what's going on, contemporary art, and specifically in New York. But let's see, in the last, I have to say 16 years, what I've done is I work, and like right now, I'm going to start working on the show, and then I have periods where I just don't do anything really. I'm thinking and doing and interested, and I might do something, but it's almost, and as I got older, I see that there's almost like, I don't know, I want to call it a station, where the idea and something is happening that it's being, it's growing, like it's growing inside of me maybe, and at some point I feel it. I just said it I was just looking at my storage and bringing out art pieces and all that stuff. And when I got in the car, I said, I'm getting ready to work, So I also, very different. And I have friends that are always working and always go like, right? Sometimes I can't. I've done that for many years, and now I don't. And I feel like I'm interested in a lot of other stuff as well, But I'm definitely involved in my ideas. I don't know if I'm answering your question, because I'm trying to see where something might trigger an idea, and then I work on it. And very few times I have an entire painting. In my last show, I had a huge painting. It was a huge painting for me. Is 7 feet by 3 feet. And I worked on it for 3-4 months, and then at one point I just felt like this is not working. So I had somebody sand it down, and they told me, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, "Here's the sandpaper," and I walked out, and they sanded the entire painting. And then, but it was still the image then. So I came back and I said, "Okay," and I don't know, in another month, and I had something that I was really satisfied with. So I've never worked with a precise idea. I have a friend in Mexico who is a wonderful artist, and everything's drawn and everything's already ready to go, and the assistants come in and they paint, and the piece is finished. And I was saying, I can't do that. I really struggle to do my work. And when I start working, I feel like, I don't know anything. I don't know how to paint. I don't know how to put colors together. But somehow I stumble and I go through it and I do it. And I think what really helps me is that I have something to work for. That I have a commitment to do a show and stuff like that now. But I'm definitely feeling that as I go through life, there's a lot of ideas out there. There's many things. I just have to be very careful where I'm looking at to get engaged with, because once that happens, then there's a commitment to go through all of these ideas to get the work done. And I'd be just all scattered everywhere.
Yeah. So instead of following an idea when you're traveling, instead of following the idea, you follow the travel and the idea comes to you. So.
I was a little bit disappointed when I was at the think a Prado Museum in Madrid, because I couldn't use my phone to take pictures. And the Louvre, you can, and other museums you can. And I was like really down on it. I said, like, how can you not use your camera or your phone to take a picture if you're not going to use the flash? Because I really wanted all these information. So what I started doing was, which was a little more difficult, I said, okay, well, then I had to take the name down, and I had to take the title of the piece, and then I had to go back and look for it in the internet, you know, which is not what I wanted to do. But there's specific art pieces that I go back and look at, and there's specific artists like Goya, you know, I really love going back and seeing that Goya has done all these wonderful paintings that were commissioned by royalty, and then to find out that he was in his 70s and did all this other work that is very dark. It was called the black paintings, and I was very interested in seeing that how precise all this portraiture was and how wonderful it was, but how I was more drawn to work that he did when he was in his 70s. Because as I approach 70 and I go, maybe there's a chance. Maybe there's still a chance for me.
Well, thank you so much.
Just one question. The first or even your second time you went to India, because India just can blow your mind. And just the first time, did it in any way influence anyone?
Oh yeah, I did a lot. I was interested in miniatures. I still am. I still am interested in Indian art, and it feeds my mind with ways of expressing myself a lot. I really look. In fact, if I'm painting, I'm definitely going to be looking at going to miniatures. And then I went to a place in India where they do miniatures still, and the thing there in India was not to create new artworks, but they copy, and they copy for a century of the same scene, and it's who does it better. And I was very interested in that, and I did work, but I was interested in the spiritual, when I went to India. And then the second time I went, well, then I was more interested in social structures and architecture, and just India is, you could like go crazy and inspiration of many sources, but yeah, definitely India. But just to get back, I was in Nepal when I went the first time to India, and the taxi driver I was falling asleep, and he said, "Look," and I looked, and I didn't see anything. I saw like a building, and I said, "What?" He said, "Didn't you say you're an artist?" And I said, "Yes." And then he said, "Paper. You want to go?" And I said, "Yes." So we walked into this place, and it was a huge patio. I'm not kidding, huge. And they had all handmade paper on the floor drying, like different colors and stuff. And they make books, but I was interested in buying just the paper. And I did a lot of pieces with wash and watercolor, and inspired all by India. I only have 2. So I was lucky to sell them.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Let's move on to our patio. We'll have refreshments
Oh, cool.
for you, and you can ask Roberto questions.
Yes. How are you? What's up?